Somewhere Better by I_am_Ellie on AO3. Episode 54. Chapter 10. Truly Alone. The days went by, school ended and summer began. Izuku's nose healed. Sho got a new job, which confused Izuku because hadn't he just gotten one? His hair grew out because Hizashi and Sho hadn't seen the point in cutting it now that the dress code didn't apply to him anymore. And time passed. And as time passed, Izuku became more and more aware of the fact that he really missed his friends. Ochako was on a business trip in the city east where he and his uncles lived, and she had said she had called him, but she hadn't done it yet. Hitoshi was always at the hospital with his dad, since he worked all the time, and Izuku didn't want to ask his uncles if Hitoshi could come over because he knew that Sho didn't like too many people in the house. Denki and Mei were at the park all the time, but Izuku couldn't go and see them either because Sho, Hizashi, and Auntie Nemuri all gotten part-time jobs. He had to stay at a daycare, and he didn't mind it much, but all the kids at the daycare were younger than him, 4 or 5 mostly, and even they have gotten their quirks already. It made him feel a bit sad. The best part of summer vacation, in Izuku's opinion, were the weekends. Weekends were awesome. Hizashi or Sho were usually both home on the weekends, and if one of them wasn't home, the other always was. When it was just him and Hizashi, they drew in coloring books or practiced Izuku's sign language. Sometimes they had karaoke battles in the kitchen, singing pop songs into the kitchen utensils, and dancing around, until they had broken a plate doing that, and Hizashi had made him promise not to tell Sho. When it was just him and Sho, they always read stories together. They were reading thicker books now, books like Harry Potter and a series called Warriors, about a bunch of cats that lived in the forest that Sho really liked. When they weren't reading, they were practicing gymnastics, and now that Izuku had gotten a little bigger, basic self-defense. Mainly where to aim if someone had a hold on him, and how to block. And Sho had stressed that part a lot. And he'd always scream for help and try to get away if someone was trying to hurt him. Izuku thought that was good advice. Screaming and running away wasn't very heroic. It wasn't something All Might or Nem or Sho would have done, but it was less scary than fighting. And Izuku was really little, so fighting anyone else that wasn't little like him was terrifying. It was a weekend now, Sunday, and Sunday was a grocery day. Hizashi and Sho liked to grocery shop on Sunday early in the morning, when it was still cool out and there weren't a lot of people in the shops. Izuku hated mornings, hating waking up for something like grocery shopping. But his uncles always brought him an ice cream bar and a Snapple drink if he behaved, and that was the motivation enough for him to get up and about. They were in the dairy section, looking at yogurt because even though none of them really liked yogurt, Auntie Nem did, and Hizashi said, "If we leave yogurt in the fridge, she won't steal all the other foods." Besides, they had coupons. Hizashi was trying to remember whether Auntie Nem preferred strawberry banana yogurt or blueberry yogurt when Izuku saw him. Izuku was in the cart, leaning against the cool metal of the side and staring beadedly out the other shoppers, when a flash of purple passed by. He was sitting up before he really had a chance to think about it. "Toshi!" he shouted gleefully, and the purple-haired boy, who was in the cart right ahead of him, shot up, standing up in his own cart. His hair was messy and looked like as if it hadn't been combed yet, and there was drool drying on his chin. Izuku had no doubt he had been falling asleep in the shopping cart. Hitoshi stared at him for a moment, before turning to his father, who was the one pushing the cart. The man was still in a white coat and scrubs, despite the early hour, and his hair was even messier than Hitoshi's. Hitoshi made a pick-me-up gesture, and Mr. Shinsou obliged, setting him down on the floor. Hitoshi darted over to Izuku. "Hi, Toshi!" Izuku cried happily, and Hitoshi grinned. He was rocking back and forth on his heels, hands clasped behind his back, and his grin showed all his teeth, including the missing front tooth. "You lost a tooth? That's awesome! I haven't lost one yet. Did the tooth fairy come? Hitoshi nodded, purple hair flapping back and forth erratically. Come up in the shopping cart, Izuku exclaimed, and Hitoshi's eyes widened for a moment before glancing at his father, looking unsure. Mr. Shinsou raised an eyebrow before turning to Ankisho and Ankisashi. That's all right with you? He asked. Ankisho glanced at the kid, then glanced at Ankisashi, and did that thing they did sometimes when they talked without saying anything, usually only happening when Izuku had gotten in trouble. I don't see why not, Ankisashi eventually answered, shrugging. Hitoshi smiled up at Ankisashi hesitantly, and Ankisashi grinned. Hitoshi turned back to Izuku and made another pick-me-up gesture. Izuku grabbed Hitoshi's hand and guided him forward until he was standing on the side of the cart, before tucking his hands under the boy's armpit and helping him up the rest of the way, like he had seen Mr. Shinsou do, when he did pick up Hitoshi up. He was a bit worried about dropping his friend, but he figured if this had been what Mr. Shinsou had done, then it was likely to work. Adults were usually right about this sort of thing. Mr. Shinsou and his uncles just watched, looking a bit amused. Hitoshi eventually got all the way up and sat on the other side of the cart. Ankisashi grabbed a large container of blueberry yogurt and set it in the cart, and the group walked on, Mr. Shinsou keeping his cart close behind them. The adults talked while Hitoshi listened to Izuku gush about what he had done over the summer, what he was doing for the rest of the summer, and how, I'm really happy to see you, Hitoshi, it's been so long. Eventually, the two boys started playing Thumb War, because the conversation had become a bit one-sided, and Hitoshi hadn't brought his red notebook. It was fun enough, and since Hitoshi's heart wasn't really in it, Izuku won the majority of the games. He was having the time of his life. By the end of the shopping trip, Izuku had a gallon of milk and a bushel of apples in his lap, and Hitoshi had several cans of corns and peas. Neither boys mind much. They were extra careful not to jostle or drop any of the items as they played. Even though they were in the store longer than they usually stayed, it felt like checkout time came far too soon. Mr. Shinsou picked up Hitoshi from the cart, setting him down on the ground, and holding his hand after he had gotten his groceries scanned up and paid for. Izuku leaned his front against the side of the cart, both arms dangling off and his cheek squished against the metal, a dejected expression on his face as he watched his friend walk away. He stayed in that position, face leaning against the side of the cart and staring at the rolling pavement under the wheels until they reached their cart. Ankisashi helped Izuku out of the cart, and Izuku helped him, and Ankisho put away the groceries. You know, Ankisashi said, conversationally. He and Ankisho worked to put a rather heavy, by the look of it, bag of cat food into the car. I got Mr. Shinsou's phone number, and he said he would be more than happy to let you and Hitoshi have playdates whenever you want, so long as they don't interfere with our schedules, of course. Izuku stared up at him for a moment, before darting forward and hugging the man's legs. Ankisashi laughed, ruffling his hair. Thank you, thank you, thank you! He chanted, grinning up at him. It's no trouble, Zu, Ankisashi said easily. I know you've been lonely without your friends. Izuku nodded, smile never dimming, even after he climbed into the car and they started driving back to the apartment. Today was a good day. When they got home, the first thing Ankisashi and Ankisho did was sit at the kitchen table, sorting through several piles of paper and pamphlets that littered the surface. Ankisho had a notebook, a pen, and a calculator, and Ankisashi was tossing aside the papers they didn't want. What you doing? Izuku asked, climbing on top of the chair, standing so he could see all the way down the table. Planning our wedding, Ankisashi said, looking through another pamphlet before wrinkling his nose and, rather violently, tossing it aside. Can I help? Izuku asked, bouncing in place on the chair. I watch people plan weddings and movies before. I'm an expert. His chest puffed up importantly. Ankisho hadn't looked up from his notebook and calculator, but Ankisashi raised an eyebrow, grinning. Go ahead, Sue. Izuku grabbed a pamphlet. It was white and gold with lots of fragile edges. There were words in fancy, curly kanji that was hard to read. Izuku didn't know how grown-ups did it. So, what do you do at weddings besides kiss and stuff? You get married in the eye of the law and all that. And after you have parties and dancing and food. Izuku opened the pamphlet. The kanji on the side was easier to read than the stuff on the outside, but he still had trouble sounding out the words, since the print was so tiny. The paper said spring weddings are nice, Izuku noted. We were hoping to do it in the summer, actually. Sometime in the next couple months or so? Izuku flipped through the papers. Dresses. They didn't need those. Suits. What were cocktails? Weddings were confusing. How come you don't just get married in the fall? Izuku asked, pushing the pamphlet away and grabbing another. I remember last year you were talking about your anniversary, but you didn't get to do anything on it because of... Sashi's face tightened slightly, and he smiled at Izuku thinly. Sho hadn't looked up from his notebook in a while, still working, but Izuku thought he might have a similar reaction. They didn't like talking about that. Yeah, that's true, Sashi noted. He ran a hand through his hair, and Izuku thought it might be shaking, just a little. Sashi glanced at Sho, who was still absorbed in his work, before sighing in what Izuku might thought have been relief before turning back to Izuku. That's a good idea, Sashi said after a moment, smiling at Izuku warmly. We might just do that. How did you get so smart, Zu? Izuku shrugged, ears going red, and Sashi crackled. Izuku quickly turned to Sho. He poked his shoulder, and Sho jumped, pushing a strand of hair out of his face, and turning to look at Izuku questioningly. Yes, Cabbage? What you doing? Sashi snorted. Math, Sho said, sighing in frustration, as another strand of hair fell into his face. Sashi reached across the table and offered him a hair tie. Thank you, he said to Sashi, quickly tying his hair back in a ponytail. Can I help? Izuku asked, leaning forward eagerly. Probably not, Sho said bluntly. He turned the notebook towards Izuku, and Izuku blinked at it in confusion for a moment before shaking his head. Exactly. That's a lot of numbers, Izuku noted. A lot. Trust me, I am fully aware, Sho said bitterly, sighing heavily as he rubbed his temples. Well, I can help by helping Sashi with his plans, Izuku said assertively, and Sho nodded. Izuku grabbed another pamphlet and gasped excitedly. Oh, Sashi! Unki! The Unki in question turns towards him, looking at the pamphlet that Izuku had gotten so excited about. My mommy wore that at her wedding. You could do that too. The kimono? Kimonos, Sashi corrected, putting the pamphlet to the side. And I don't think that would be a good idea, Izuku. No, absolutely not, Sho said, looking up quickly. But they wear them in the movies and they look nice. No, Izuku, Sho said again. But you said I could help, and it... Izuku, Sho shouted. I said no. Drop it. Izuku's eyes widened, and they began to burn with unshed tears. He could feel his face start to crumble in. Shouta, take a walk, Sashi said, sitting up a bit straighter. Sho took a deep breath. His hands were holding his elbows, clenched so tightly his knuckles looked white. I'm fine. Shouta, Sashi snapped. Go take a walk and calm down. Sho stood up from his chair abruptly, sliding on his shoes and walking out the door. And then he was gone. Sashi grabbed his hand, and Izuku turned toward him. Sashi was crouched down by his chair, and he looked a little mad, but Izuku didn't think he was mad at him, and that was nice. He practically fell forward, but Sashi was there to catch him, one arm holding him close as Izuku cried into his shoulder, and the other hand carding through his hair. For a moment, it felt as though if he would never stop crying. I'm so sorry. I was trying to help, Izuku stuttered. His voice was so broken up and shaky that Even he had trouble understanding himself. I know, it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. It's okay. Hizashi said, like a mantra. He kept saying that for the next hour, until Izuku fell asleep. As I was reading this, my mind went back to that one comment that I read a while back of this series that somebody said that they did not like the fight scenes. Hi, hello. Are you okay with this? Like, this good for you? I think I remember what vaguely happens in this, and it's... yeah. Do I condone Shouta for lashing out on Izuku? No. No. Is it understandable? Yes, to a certain degree. I understand. Is it okay? No. He should have been able to calm himself down or understood at that moment that he needed to walk away, right? Like, he needs to get up and walk away, right? But to a certain degree, it's understandable. We're humans. We make mistakes. Am I mad at Shouta? No, I'm not. And I love this story, and this author specifically, the way that they portray Shouta and Hizashi and all these complications and stuff like that and these arguments in a way where it seems like, okay, they are clearly having an argument, but at the end of the time when they agree again, when they get back, right, it doesn't feel as though it's forced. A lot of the times I see in main media, specifically main media, it's not as much in fan fictions because I don't see fan fictions do this, but in main media, you, for example, a good example would be to all the boys I love the most, right? In the beginning, obviously, or towards the middle, there seems to be a misunderstanding, a disagreement, and there's like a fight, and then, you know, they make up, and it feels okay, right? But then in movie 2, it seems as though the disagreement came back up, and it's different, and it's weird, and it basically, main media tends to make a couple have a problem, solve it, have that problem come back up again, but disguised. Like, I wish I was joking. Think about it. Look at all those movies or shows where a couple are fighting and then the same problem comes back up again, right? Over and over and over. But then they end up becoming endgame. I'm sorry. And they never fix that problem either. That's my biggest thing, if they don't fix the problem. I have seen main medias where they fix the problem towards the end and then they become endgame, right? But my problem is they don't fix the problem how it's supposed to be, right? In this sense, the argument that happened in the beginning, right? The first argument we saw with them, which was the argument because Hizashi was being, honestly, a dick, right? Understandable why. He was going through a rough time. But he was being a dick. He was being a dick. And they overcome that. Hizashi understood. He apologized. And he's like, I was being a dick. Right? And they overcame that. We're obviously going to see something happen here. And again, overcome that. I love that they talk about it, and it takes a while, but they overcome it, right? Hizashi didn't go from being a dick to being 100% okay. No, in that first fight, yes, he became better. He no longer threw his anger out on, you know, Izuku or Hitoshi, or Shouta, not Hitoshi, Shouta, right? But it does not mean that he was better. He was still going through his stuff. He just learned to, what's it called? Express said anger and emotion in a more healthy way for both him and the people around him, right? It's all about finding a balance, right? In relationships, there is always going to be arguments. There's always going to be disagreement. What makes or break a relationship is how you get through them, how you work through them. If you're having the same, not the same argument, but the same, you're constantly having problems and arguments. And if you tie it down and you look at the root, it all stems on one problem that you have that is causing all these little problems. Sure, you could fix every small little problem you have, but in the end, more are just gonna keep popping up because you don't fucking, you know, talk about the main one. Talk about the main one, fix the motherfucking main one, and then you could have a good relationship with your partner. But a lot of the times in main media, that does not happen, and it frustrates me. But here we see things going on. We see that they're planning their wedding, so that's cute, that's nice. If I remember correctly, there's gonna be a certain area where I'm gonna cry because I think there's a certain, I don't know if it's in this fanfiction. Again, it's been a while since I've read this, but I remember this one scene, and I really hope it's not from this, and that it was something else completely, and it was something else that I'm mixing up with this, because sometimes I do that. So pray, hope, crossing fingers. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.